Andy Austin here, live in the attic, and it's absolutely roasting. So today's video, mask madness. There is a madness stalking this land, and it is about masks. And this is something I've been watching since really the beginning, with some degree of curiosity, mostly because of the way people behave and the things that people do and say regarding something they probably don't know much about, but have a very high level of opinionation about. Now, I'm quite familiar with wearing a mask. I used to work in a hospital. Now, realistically, most of the roles that involve wearing masks all day, I try to avoid, predominantly because they are the highly disciplined, highly professional. We have to be really concentrated for long periods of time. Things like general surgery, or surgery generally, I mean to say, which were not really my environments. I like lots of variety and things a little bit different than that. And so people will literally wear masks all day long. Now, I've been out of the hospital environments now for a lot of years, and so my knowledge of what goes on inside hospitals and research is way out of date. But this is what the prevailing wisdom used to be. Now, I finished working in hospitals at the end of 1999. And at the time, whether masks were a good thing to wear in surgical environments or not was hotly debated. And it's still, as far as I know, it's still an issue. The question was raised, are staff wearing masks because they've always done it, or is there actually any evidence or research to support this? Now, in the studies that were being done back then, some interesting observations were discovered. One of which, and you want to Google these two words later on, perineal fallout. That's right, perineal fallout, as a major problem within operations. So essentially, when you open up a patient to do surgery, the skin is a really good barrier for most diseases. When you open up the patient, get into deep tissues, now they're immediately vulnerable into the deep circulatory system and to deep tissues. And so the prevailing wisdom is that if you've got a mask on, things aren't going to drop out of your nose, which is quite a bacterially loaded environment, and into the patient. Makes a lot of sense. Now, the question was, what about the breath? Because the breath makes the mask moist, and does that do anything? But the observation was perineal fallout. Bits falling from other regions down the trouser leg onto the floor and then being kicked up into the atmosphere was actually an issue. And so the recommendation at around about the time I left was that either wear Wellington boots, and in the operating department you get these half Wellington boots that a lot of people wear, or elastic bands around the trousers of your operating greens. And that was a fairly common practice, in addition to the masks. And generally in the operating rooms, the only people that actually wore the masks were the people immediately by the patient. Some anaesthetists did, they preferred it, but they didn't necessarily have to. That wasn't the rules back then. Now, infection doesn't always work the way that I think the layperson thinks it does. In hospitals, we talk about infection control. The reality is infection is absolutely everywhere, bacteria everywhere. You've got people coming into the environment bringing fresh loads of bacteria on a constant basis, and then migrating that around the departments and around the patients. So you try and limit the amount of infection by controlling the spread as much as possible. Other little interesting observations that emerged. One was they used to do surgical shaving usually the night before surgery. If a person got a lot of body hair, it can be problematic for the surgeon, especially when you're suturing up, because you get hairs in the way and they can get into the wound and so forth. So surgical shaving was quite common. They discovered, of course, in doing so, you disrupt the bacteria on the skin, and so surgical shaving is actually problematic. And I think, if I remember rightly, it was supposed to be done preferably like 48 hours beforehand, or at the time of surgery, in order to minimize the bacterial spread. In orthopedic surgery, one of the things that was innovated, and I thought this was really clever, so this is bone surgery, and if you get infection into a bone, that's really bad news. The operating site, they would cover them in a sticky plastic film, and I forget its name. If you work in hospitals, you know what I'm talking about. Do please stick that in the comment section. And so essentially now the body was encased, or that region of the body is encased in plastic, so that they would cut through that and through the skin. So now no bacteria from the patient's own skin is going to contaminate into the wound. And so that was quite a good innovation. And again, it reduced down infection tremendously. Now we're presented with a virus that is stalking this land in a global pandemic. Now, this is where the madness begins, because an awful lot of people who've never worked in infection control areas or infection control behaviors, who are also likely to have been completely unaffected by the virus, because only a minority of the population have been infected, and the majority of people who are infected are symptom-free. So you have a lot of people out there who have no first-hand personal experience of any person they know who is infected. And yet, of course, they're seeing it on the news, they're hearing all these reports, they're hearing a lot of media hysteria. Let's face it, the media like to stir things up tremendously. And a lot of misinformation on the internet and so forth. And in their world, they're going, well, where is this virus? This virus doesn't seem to be happening. And yet I hear all of these things. It's not a conspiracy. It's just the demographics of how this disease is working. Now, part of the infection control that is attempted is to get the populace to wear a mask. Now, most people originally, probably about 12 months ago, when mask wearing was being recommended, were willingly wearing a mask because they don't want to get the disease. Because people are frightened. They don't know what's going to happen to them. Don't want to get the disease. But of course, that doesn't prevent you from getting the disease. In fact, mask wearing has got very little to do outside of hospitals with reception of disease. I don't think, as far as I know, there's any evidence that says wearing a mask will stop you from getting it. However, it will stop you or reduce the incidence of transmitting it. And that's the key thing here. It's not about the reception of it, it's about the transmission of it. This is why most of the staff in a hospital environment where the mask wearing is the routine, that's why they're wearing it. It's not to stop them getting something, it's to stop them discharging bodily stuff into the body of another patient. So, we also have a disease that essentially, in the majority of people who are infected with it, there are no signs or symptoms, yet they are highly contagious and will be transmitting it. A major route of transmission, of course, is the breath. Water vapor in the breath and spittle coming out and so forth. Putting a mask, they're not very good filters. Again, the public seem to think, well, the Facebook public, the anti-mask people seem to think, it's a filter. It's not about filtering out bacteria. These things aren't virus filters. They're not bacteria filters. That's not what it's about. It's about reducing the outward spread of what comes out of your mouth. And the cloud of detritus in microbial form, I don't know what the words are, is reduced massively by the wearing of a mask. And then, of course, as time goes on, people start to polarize. And what I'm seeing is a bizarre thing. In America, essentially, if you're against wearing a mask, you're more likely to be right-wing Republican. And if you're pro-wearing a mask, you're more likely to be liberal left-wing Democrat. So it's taken on this political ideology as well. And the Republicans go, they can't come here and tell us what to do, taking away our freedoms and our jobs. Stand up for yourself, be free. Because apparently wearing a mask is a major imposition upon their freedoms, and what they're compelled to have to go and do is assault and insult lowly paid shop workers who have to enforce the rules of the establishment. I mean, seriously, if you're a viewer and you found yourself berating a shop staff because there was a sign up that said you have to wear a mask and you chose not to, and now you're going to get rude and insult people and get out that phone, start filming everyone because you're entitled. You really, really want to start reevaluating some of your life choices. I'm just saying. But meanwhile, over here in the UK, and I don't know about other countries because I don't tend to pay too much attention, but in the UK it's the other way round. The more liberal, progressive type people are much more likely to go, you can't take away our freedoms and tell us what to do. We're not wearing a mask. At least all the anti-maskers I know are progressive liberals. And we're much more likely to see the right-wing conservatives be pro-mask because they don't want all of the peasants out there spreading their germs around. And so again, even in the UK, it's taken on this kind of polarizing position. And what seems to be lost in all of this is common sense, rationality, and the evidence and the science for it. Essentially, my take on all of this is that The general public have got no training or experience in infection control and don't understand the rationale and reasons for it. Meanwhile, media hysteria, as mentioned before, and then, of course, this other really important detail, government. Now, I'm not a fan, it has to be said. I'm not a fan of our current leadership. Some room for improvement there. Why don't people trust them? Simply because they lie constantly about pretty much everything. So when these same people who are demonstrated to be lying incessantly over everything come out and start telling us what to do, which is for a lot of people an imposition, of course, because it's something new they wouldn't normally have to do, put a mask on, well, who's telling me to do that? Oh, the same people that lie about everything. But they say follow the science. But you can't believe the science because it's coming from the So I totally understand why people would have some serious skeptical positions relative to mask wearing and legislation and lockdown restrictions and so forth. Now, here's the reality. Lots of people are dying. I know firsthand what it can be like to have COVID. I didn't even have it very badly. I've had a particular relative who has been in hospital incredibly unwell with it, so I have some first-hand experience, and I have friends and colleagues who have also been debilitated. I'm now recovered, thankfully, finally, after over a year. I have a colleague who went down with it about 2 weeks before myself, and she is still massively disabled by this virus. And herein lies the other issue. A lot of the people who are self-professed experts are going, yeah, but the death rate's less than that of influenza. Yeah, it's not about the death rate. There are other things going on for people, not just the death rate. And so that's quite important as well. Now, there's the issue about the vaccine, but I'm going to do another video on that one because I'm beginning to see some weird sociological, community-based behaviors around the vaccine. Mostly, it's really important. If you say, yes, I've had the vaccine, immediately people say, oh, which vaccine did you get? Was it the AstraZeneca or the other two? Really, why? It's so important to people. As always, any additional views, anything you disagree with, anything else, stick it in the comment section. And do please click the like button. I'm trying to get this YouTube channel up and up the listings. Keep clicking that like button. Any comments are good comment. All interactions are good interactions. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.